All right. Douglas Johnson, seeing Johnson in Inauguration Day. Let's look back a little bit here. Talking about the Committee of 15 and how they're not, he was trying to get a proposition for which the 2/3 majority of Congress would vote and start the country as far on the road to democracy and abolished the castes as was possible under the circumstances. He complained that his proposition had, quote, been slaughtered by a purely and pedantic criticism. Andrew Johnson was deeply incensed with Sumner's speech and sneered at it next day. And this is him. I am free to say to you what I do not like to be arraigned by someone who can get up handsomely rounded periods and deal in rhetoric and talk about abstract ideas of liberty, who never periled life, liberty, and property. This kind of theoretical, hollow, unpractical friendship amounts to but very little. He was receiving a group of black people who were trying to direct appeal, either to get his sympathy or to probe his animus against the race. The Freedmen's Bureau bill had passed, but Johnson had not yet indicated what action he would take. The Civil Rights Bill and the first draft of the 14th Amendment were before the Senate. Perhaps the delegation hoped to influence him. Douglas had seen Johnson in the Inauguration Day in 1865 when President Lincoln had appointed Douglas out to him. Quote, the first expression which came to his face, in which I think was the true index of his heart, was one of bitter contempt and aversion. Seeing, oh my gosh, already a visible thing. Jesus Christ. Was one of the bitter contempt and aversion. Seeing that I observed him, he tried to assume a more friendly appearance, but it was too late. End quote. In the interview with President Johnson, on February 2nd, 1866, there were present George T. Downing of Rhode Island, Eric E. Matthews of New York, John Jones of Philadelphia, John F. Cook of Washington, Joseph E. Otis, A. W. Ross, William Wiper, John M. Brown, Alexander Dunlap, Frederick Douglass, and his son Lewis. What was said on the occasion brought the whole question virtually before the American people. Until that interview, the country was not fully aware of the intentions and policy of President Johnson in the subject of Reconstruction, especially in respect to the newly emancipated class of the South. After having heard the brief address made by him to Mr. Downing and myself, he occupied at least 3/4 of an hour in what seemed a set speech, and refused to listen to any reply on our part, although solicited to grant a few moments for that purpose. The president shook his hands with the men of color, and then George T. Downing, a leading black person from Newport, Rhode Island, opened the discussion. He said to the president, quote, we desire for you to know what we come feeling, that we are friends meeting a friend, end quote. He said that they represented people of color from the state of Illinois, Wisconsin, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and the New England states, and the District of Columbia. They were not satisfied with the amendment prohibiting slavery, but wanting it reinforced by appropriate legislation. We are Americans, native-born Americans. We are citizens. We see no recognition of color or race in the organic law of the land. It has been shown in the present war that the government may justly reach its strong arm into the states and demand for those who owe its allegiance their assistance and support. May it not reach out a like arm to secure and protect its subjects upon whom it has a claim. When Frederick Douglass came forward and said, this is what he said, your noble, humane predecessors placed in our hands a sword to assist in saving the nation. And we do hope that you, his able successor, will favorably regard the places in his hands, the ballot with which to save ourselves. The president was evidently embarrassed and floundered. He was not going to make a speech. He had jeopardized life, liberty, and property, not only for people of color, but for the great mass of people. He was a friend of the men of color, but, quote, I don't want to adopt a policy that I believe will end in a contest between races, which if persisted, it will result in the extermination of one or the other, end quote. He remembered his speech to Nashville black people in Nashville, before the election, and repeated his willingness to be a, quote, Moses to lead him from bondage to freedom, end quote, but not into a war of races. He said that one can talk about the ballot box and justice and Declaration of Independence, but, quote, suppose by some magic touch you can say to everyone, you shall vote tomorrow. How much would that ameliorate their conditions at this time? Then President approached Douglass and said, now let us get closer to this subject. He said he opposed slavery because it was a monopoly and gave profit and power to an aristocracy. By getting clear of the monopoly, they had abolished slavery. Douglass started to interrupt, but the president was not through. He went on to show the position of poor white in relations to slave owners and how the slaves despised the poor whites. Douglass denied this personally, but the president insisted that anyway, most people of color did. And this made the poor white man opposed both to the slave and his masters, and that therefore there was enmity between men of color and the poor white. Already the person of color had gained his freedom during the war, and if he and the poor white came into competition at the ballot box, a, quote, war of races would result. Moreover, was it proper to put on a people without their consent? Black suffrage. Did you deny this first great principle of the right of the people to govern themselves? Were here Downing interpreted, quote, I apply what you have said, Mr. President, to South Carolina, for instance, where a majority of inhabitants are people of color. The president twisted uncomfortably, and said that the matter to which he referred, quote, comes up when a government is undergoing a fundamental change. And he referred to the instance Ohio rather than South Carolina. Was it right to enforce Ohio to make a change in the elective franchise against its will? He could not touch the question as to whether it was right to prevent a majority in South Carolina from ruling because, to his mind, no number of black people would outweigh the will of whites. He stumbled on without mentioning this suppressed manner premise and said, quote,
minor premise.
Yeah, and said, quote, it is a fundamental tenet of my creed that the will of the people must be obeyed. Is there anything wrong or unfamiliar in that? Douglass smiled, still thinking of South Carolina. Quote, a great deal that is wrong, Mr. President, with all respect, end quote. But the president insisted, and here's his quote, it is the people of the state that must for themselves determine this thing. I do not want to engage in a work that will commence a war of races, end quote. Then he indicated that the interview was at an end. He was glad to have met them and thanked them for the compliment paid him. Douglas returned the thanks and said that they cannot come to argue, but if the president would grant permission, quote, we would endeavor to controvert some of the positions you have assumed. Mr. Downing, too, suggested pervasively that the president, by his kind explanation, quote, must have contemplated some reply to the views which he was advanced. Douglas continued, I would like to say one or two words in reply. You enfranchise your enemy and disenfranchise your friends. My own impression is that the very thing that Your Excellency would avoid in the southern states can only be avoided by the very measure that we proposed. I would like to say a word or so I regard to that manner of the enfranchisement of black people as a means to preventing the very thing which Your Excellency seems to apprehend. That is a conflict of races. The president naturally did not want to give publicity to a view of black antagonistic to his own, and said shortly that there were other places besides the South for black people to live. Quote, but, said Douglas, the masters have the making of the laws, and we cannot get away from the plantations. What prevents you? Asked Johnson. Douglas replied that his master then decides for him where he shall go, where he shall work, how much he shall work. He is absolutely in the hands of those men. The president replied, if the master now controls him, or his actions would be not to control him in his vote. Douglas answered, let black people once understand that he has an organic right to vote, and he will raise up a party in the southern states among the poor who will rally with him. There is this conflict that you speak of between the wealthy slave owner and the poor man. The president replied eagerly, you touch right upon the point there. There is this conflict, and hence I suggest immigration. End quote. The president then bowed his dark visitors out, saying they were all desirous of accomplishing the same ends, but proposed to do so by following different roads. Douglas turned to leave and said, the president sends us to the people, and we go to the people. Yes, sir, answered the president. I have great faith in the people. I believe they will do what is right. Afterwards, the people of color delegation published a reply to various points brought by the president, and especially stressed the matter of enmity between black people and poor whites. The first point to which we feel especially bound to take exception is your attempt to found a policy opposed to our enfranchisement upon the alleged ground of existing hostilities on the part of the former slaves towards the poor white people of the South. We admit the existence of this hostility and hold that it is entirely reciprocal, but you obviously commit an error by drawing an argument from the incident of slavery and making it a basis for the policy adapted to a state of freedom. The hostility between the white and black people of the South is easily explained. It has to root and sap in the relations of slavery, and was incited on both sides of the cunning by the cunning of the slave master. Those masters secured their ascendancy over both the poor whites and black people by putting enmity between them. They divided both to conquer each. There was so earthly reasons why black people should not hate and dread the poor whites when in the state of slavery, for it was from this class that their masters received their slave catchers, slave drivers, and overseers. They were the men called in upon all occasions by the master when in fiendish outrage was to be committed upon the slave. Now, sir, you cannot but perceive that the cause for this hatred removed, the effect must be removed also. Slavery is abolished. This cause of this antagonism is removed, and you must see that it is altogether illogical, and putting, quote, new wine into new old bottles, end quote, to legislate from slaveholding premises for a people whom you have repeatedly declared it your purpose to maintain in freedom. Besides, even if it were true, as you allege, that the hostilities of black people towards poor whites, must necessarily project itself into the state of freedom. And that is enmity between the two races is even more intense in the state of freedom than in the state of slavery. In the name of heaven, we reverently ask, how can you, in view of your professed desire to promote the welfare of black men, deprive him of all means of defense and clothe him whom you regard as his enemy in the panoply of political power? Can it be that you recommend a policy which would arm the strong and cast down the defenseless? Can you, by any possibility of reasoning, regard this as just, fair, or wise? Experiences prove that those are most abused who can be abused with the greatest impunity. On the colonization theory you were pleased to broach, very much could be said. It is impossible to suppose a view of the usefulness of the black man in times of peace as a laborer in the South, and in time of war as a soldier in the North, and the growing respect for his rights among the people, and his increasing adaptation to a high state of civilization in his native land. That there can never come a time when we can be removed from this country without a terrible shock to its propensity and peace. The Committee of 15 began its work again. The indomitably Stevens never gave up, never despaired. If he could not get all he wanted, he stood fast and took what he could. He said sadly, June 13th, 1866, in the House of Representatives, referring to the proposed 15th Amendment with its permission to disenfranchise black people. In my mouth, in my youth, in my manhood, in my old age, I have found dreamed that when any fortune chance should have broken up for a while the foundation of our institutions and release us from obligation, the most tyrannical that every man imposed in the name of freedom, that the intelligent, pure, and just men of this republic, true in their professions and their consciousness, would have so remodeled all our institution as to have freed them from every vestige of human oppression, of inequalities of rights, of the recognition, degradation of the poor, and the superior caste of the rich. In short, that no distinctions would be tolerated in this purified republic, but what rose from the merit of the conduct. This bright dream was vanished, quote, like the baseless fabric of a vision, end quote. I find that we shall be obliged to be content with patching up the worst portions of the ancient edifice and leave it in many of its parts to be swept through by the tempest, frosts, and the storms of despotism. Do you inquire why, holding these views and possessing some will of my own. I accept, so I am perfect a proposition. I answer because I live among men and not among angels, among men as intelligent, as determined, and as independent as myself, who, not agreeing with me, do not choose to yield up their opinions to mine. Mutual concession is our only resort for mutual hostilities. The Committee of the 15 now try to find out by actual inquiry just what the situation in the South was with regards to black people. It did so not so much because anyone was in doubt, as because of the situation of black people was the most appealing thing that could be used to bring a majority to vote for the industrial North. It would increase the tremendous moral afflatus, which made the war more and more symbolic in the minds of the people of the United States, and a great triumph of human freedom. Subcommittee of the main committee took testimony for months all over the South and eventually issued an unanswerable array of evidence. April 20th, Robert Dale Owens brought a proposal for a 14th Amendment to Stevens in the Committee of 15. Stevens picked up my manuscript, looked it carefully over, and then, in his impulsive way, said, I'll be plain with you, Owen. We've had nothing before us that comes anywhere near being as good as this, or as complete. It would be likely to pass too. That's the best of it. We haven't a majority either in our committee or in Congress for immediate suffrage, and I don't believe the states have yet advanced so far that they will be willing to ratify it. I'll lay that amendment of yours before our committee tomorrow. If you say so, and I'll do my best to put it through. Previous to this time, the thought was to bring in several separate amendments, but now the attitude was to unite the whole matter in one comprehensive amendment, so that the proposition of April 21st was presented as follows. Section 1. No discrimination shall be made by any state nor by the United States as to the civil rights of persons because of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. Section 2. From and after the 4th day of July in the year 1866, no discrimination shall be made by any state nor by the United States as to the employment of class of a person, of the right of suffrage because of race. What?
It's enjoyment of classes of person.
Thank you. Of the right of suffrage because of race, color, and previous conditions of servitude. Section 3. Until the 4th day of July, 1866, no class of persons as to the right of any of whom to suffrage discrimination shall be made by any state because of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude shall be included in the basis of representation. Section 4. Debts occurred in aid or of insurrection or of war against the Union, and claims of compensation for loss of involuntary service or labor shall not be paid by any state nor by the United States. Bingham moved a 5th section to the amendments along the lines of his previous efforts. Section 5. No state shall make or enforce any laws which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of liberty, of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person without its jurisdiction of equal protection of the laws. The Bingham proposal was first adopted and when stuck out by the committee, it was voted 7 to 6 to report the first 3 sections to Congress. Bingham tried in vain to bring in his proposal as a separate amendment Thus, Owen's proposition was ordered sent to Congress and had a good chance of being adopted by Fessenden. The chairman was sick with, oh my gosh, viroid. Don't know that word.
I don't know that word either. Varioloid.
A mid-form of smallpox that occurs in people who have been previously vaccinated or had previous infection. Okay. All right, cool. And it was decided to delay final report until he was better. Stevens told Owens the sequel. Our actions on our amendment, said Stevens, had it seem gotten noised abroad. In the course of last week, the member from New York, from Illinois, and from the state, and from your state too, Owen from Indiana, held each separately a caucus to consider rather equality of suffrage, present or prospective, ought to form a part of the Republican program for the coming canvass. They were afraid, so some of them told us that if there was a N-word in the woodpile, quote unquote, at all, that was the phrase, it would be used against them as a electioneering handle, and some of them hang their cowardice might lost their election. But unconsiderably majorities, each of these caucuses decided that black suffrage in any shape ought to be excluded from the platform. And they communicated these decisions to us. Our committee hadn't backbone enough to maintain its ground. Yesterday, the vote on our plan was considered. Your amendment as was laid on the table, and in the course of the next 3 hours, we contrived to patch together. Well, what you've read this morning. The section was changed so as simply to exclude disenfranchised black people from being made the basis of the appointment. Williams then presented a new section which allowed black people gradually to be enfranchised and thus gradually to become a basis of representation. Representatives shall be appointed among several states, which may be included within this union, according to their perspectives, numbers counting the whole number of person in each state, including indigenous not taxed. Oh, yeah, that's bad. Indigenous not taxed. But even in any state, the elective franchise shall be denied to any portion of the male citizens, not less than 21 years of age, or in each way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crimes. This basis of representation in such states shall be reduced in the portion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens not less than 21 years of age. This was adopted as Section 2 in the final amendment. Finally, on this same date, the committee reinserted by a vote of 10-3 Brigham's proposition on civil rights as Section 1 afterward. Conklin, before the Supreme Court, explained this action. At the time of the 14th Amendment was ratified, individuals and joint stock companies were appealing for the congressional and administrative protection against the individuals and discriminating states of local taxes. One instance was that of an express company whose stock was owned largely by citizens of the state of New York, who came with petitions and bills seeking acts on Congress to aid them in resisting that they deemed oppressive taxation in two states and oppressive and ruinous rules of damages. applied under state law, that complaints of oppression in respect of property and other rights made by citizens of northern states who took up residence in the South were rife in and out of Congress. The committee then considered Section 3. Mr. Harris moved to insert the following: until the 4th day of July in the year 1970, all persons who voluntarily adhere to the late insurrection, giving it aid and comfort, shall be excluded from the right to vote for representatives in Congress and for electors of President and Vice President of the United States. This was finally adopted by a vote of 8-7. The committee then discussed the readmission of the Southern states with the 14th Amendment as a condition. Finally, the joint resolution and the bill concerning the readmission to the Southern states were adopted by a vote of 12-3. This proposed amendment and bill was reported to the House April 30th, debated May 8th, 9th, and 10th, and passed on May 10th. Stevens defended it May 8th and May 10th. Our fathers had been compelled to postpone the principles of this great declaration and wait for their full establishment until a more propitious time.
Proprietous.
That time ought to be present now, but the public mind has been educated in error for a century. How difficult in a day to unlearn it. In rebuilding it, it is necessary to clear away the rotten and defected portions of the old foundation and to sink deep and found the unrepaired edifice upon the firm foundation of internal justice. If perchance the accumulated quicksand rendered it impossible to reach in every part so firm a basis, when it becomes our duty to drive deep the solid the substituted pile on which to build, it would, oh my gosh, hold on a second, I gotta do another thing, hold on. Jesus Christ. It would not be wise to prevent the rising of the structures because some corner of it might be found upon material subjects to the inevitable laws and mortal decay. It were better to shelter the household and trust to the advancing progress of the higher mortality and the purer and more intelligent principle to underpin the defective corner. This proposition is not all that the committee desires. It falls short of my wishes, but it fulfills my hopes. I believe it is all that can be obtained in the present state of public opinion. Not only Congress, but several states are to be consulted upon a careful survey of the whole ground. We did not believe that 19 of the loyal states could be induced to ratify the proposition more stringent than this. I say 19, for I utterly repudiate this and scorn the idea that any state not acting in the Union is to be counted on the question of ratification. It is absurd to suppose that any more than 3/4 of the states that propose the amendment are required to make it valid. That states not here or on or to be counted as present. Believing then that this is the best proposition that can be made effectual, I accept it. I shall not be driven by clamor or denunciation to throw away a great cause because it is not perfect. I will take all I can get in the cause of humanity and leave it to be perfected by better men in better times. It may be that time will not come while I am here to enjoy the glorious triumph, but that it will come as is as certain as that there is just a just God. Stevens then referred to the previous draft and the amendment. After having received a carefully examination and an approbation of the committee, and having received the United Republican vote of 20 representatives of the people, it was denounced as utterly reprehensible and unpardonable, to be encountered as a public enemy, possibly endangering the peace of the country and covering its names with dishonor, a wickedness of a large scale, that the crime against Kansas or the fugitive slave law, gross, foul, outrageous, and incredible injustice against the whole African race, with every other vulgar epithet which polished cultivation could command. I confess my mortification at this defeat, my grief, especially because it almost closed the door of hope for the amelioration of the condition of the freemen. But men in pursuit of justice must never despair. Let us again try to see whether we cannot devise some way of overcoming and united force of self-righteous Republicans and unrighteous Copperheads. It will not do for those who, for 30 years, have fought the beast of Ephesus to be frightened by the fangs of modern catamounts. Thaddeus Stevens continues his speech, May 10th. Let not these friends of secession sing to me their siren songs of peace and goodwill until they can stop my ears to the screams and groans of dying victims at Memphis. I hold in my hand a elaborate account from a man whom I know to be of the highest respectability in the country. Every word of which I believe. This account of that foul transaction only reached me last night. It is more horrible in its atrocity, although not to the same extent than the massacre at Jamaica. Tell me, Tennessee or any other state is loyal of whom such things are proved. Ah, sir, it was but 6 years ago when they were here, just before they went out to join the armies of Catiline, just before they left his halls. Those of you who were here when then will remember the scene of which every Southern member, every Southern member, encouraged by his allies, came forth in one yelling body, because a speech for freedom was being made here, when weapons were drawn and Barksdale's Browning knife gleamed before our eyes. How would you have these men back again so soon to reenact those scenes? Wait until I am gone, I pray you. I want not to go through it again. It will be but a short time for my colleagues to wait. Now, sir, if the gentleman had remembered the scenes 20 years ago, when no man dared to speak without risking his life, when but a few men did do it, for there were cowards in those days, as there are in these. You would not have found them asking to bring these men in. And I only wonder that my friend from Ohio, Mr. Bingham, should imitate a desire to bring them here. The announcement of the vote, May 10th, was 128 to 39. 19 voted not voting. It was received with applause on the floor and in the galleries. Mr. Eldridge of Wisconsin rose angrily to the question of order. quote, I want to know if it is understood that the proceedings of this house are to be interpreted by those who come here and occupy the galleries. The gentleman from Wisconsin, replied the speaker, make the point of order that expression of approbation and disapprobation from persons occupying the galleries are not in order. The chair sustains the points of order. But Mr. Eldred was still angry. I do not want our proceedings to be interpreted by the inward heads in the gallery. Oh my gosh. Members upon the floor should not insult the spectators in the gallery, said the speaker. The 14th Amendment came up in the Senate, April 30th, but Fasidian was still ill, and no action was taken for 2 weeks. Finally, May 23rd, Howard of Michigan began the debate. He declared that the object of the 14th Amendment was primarily to give Congress the power to enforce the guarantees of freedom in the first 8 amendments to the Constitution. The West, led by Sherman, Doolittle, and others, tried to reintroduce voters as a basis of representation. New England, through Senator Wilson of Massachusetts, was opposed to striking from the basis of representation of 2,100,000 unnaturalized foreigners who gave the North 17 representatives. Sherman did not agree. Quote, if it is right to exclude 4 million of black people in the southern states who are denied representation, is it not also right to exclude all other classes in every other state who are denied political power? The question of black citizenship was discussed, and Julian of Indiana opposed the conservative stand. And to follow conservatism, we would recognize the revolting states as still in the Union. It opposed the protection of the million of loyal people of color of the South through the agency of Freedmen's Bureau. It opposed the Civil Rights Bill. It opposed with all bitterness the policy of giving the freemen the ballot. On the other hand, radicalism would hold treason in crime a crime. It would base representation on the actual voters. It favors the protection of people of color of the South through the Freedmen's Bureau and the Civil Rights Bill. It demands the ballot as the right of every citizen of color. Evidently, the breach between the East and the West was growing, and coupled with Sumner's attitude, it looked as though the 14th Amendment was again doomed. The Republican Party fell back upon the caucus from May 24th to May 28th. The Senate was in session but a few hours, which gave the Republicans time to discuss the whole matter in the party caucus. The party at the time showed clear division into conservative industrial elements like Fessenden, Trumbull, and Morgan, and the abolition democracy led by Sumner, Wade, and Yates. The opposition of Sumner and the abolition democracy was finally overcome by the plain facts of the case. This was the utmost that could be got from Congress in the defense of democracy. It was not worth talking. What would?
Is it not worth taking?
Yeah, I was about to repeat it. Yeah, I was about to repeat it because I saw that. Thank you. What could be hoped for in further delay? As a result of the caucuses, certain amendments were made. The second section was amended to strike out the word citizens and exert inhabitants being citizens of the United States. A new first section was inserted that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdictions thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. The Senate's changes thus consisted in defining who were citizens and in substituting for disenfranchisement of the participants in session until 1870. The eligibility of certain high officials. It opened the elective franchise to such persons as the states may choose to admit, and adopted the third section in its present form. We have thus followed as well records. Let us the inner history of the Reconstruction measure of the Congress in the Committee of 15 and other sources. Now let us look at the proceeding of Congress as negotiations on these matters. Of the 14th Amendment said, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the United States wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any persons within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the law.
Can I say?
What?
I just wanted to bring up that it's sad that we're learning about them putting and how hard they worked to get this amendment added, and they've completely destroyed it very recently.
The first proposition of the Civil Rights was introduced into the House of Mr. Stevens, December 5th, 1865. On December 6th, Bingham of Ohio offered an amendment. Both these resolutions went to the Committee on the Judiciary. Two other propositions were introduced. December 11th, February 1st, 1866, a motion was passed directing the Committee of 15 to inquire into this matter. Williams suggests an amendment, February 5th, empowering Congress to enforce, quote, all obligations, prohibition, or disabilities imposed by the Constitution of the several states. February 13th, 1866, the Committee of 15, as we have noted, reported to both the House of proposed amendments by Mr. Bingham in the House and by Mr. Fessenden in the Senate. Both motions were indefinitely postponed, and there was a strong desire to get the whole final report of the Committee of 15. On March 9th, 1866, while the Senate was discussing the appointment of representatives, Senator Yates of Illinois moved an amendment for civil and political rights, but it secured only 7 votes. Two another and similar propositions were made in the Senate, but received small support. The first section of the resolution reported to the House April 30th, 1866, became eventually the Civil Rights section of the 14th Amendment passed by the House. But the Senate as we have seen, did not adopt it. Several attempts were made to amend it, and in the Senate, Mr. Wade offered a substitution for the entire resolution, but the whole proposition failed. When the second proposition came before the Senate, May 30th, Howard of Michigan, in behalf of the Senate members of the Joint Committee, presented a series of resolutions which had been adopted by the Republican caucus as a substitute for the House amendment. The substitution was accepted. The first change was to prefix these words of the first clause of the amendment. Quote, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. Later, Fessenden of Maine secured the inclusion of naturalized persons. Senator Johnson of Maryland tried unsuccessfully to strike out the guarantee that states should not make or enforce any law to abridge the privileges of immunity of citizens. Disability for participation in succession was covered by Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president or vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislator or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same in giving aid or comfort to any enemy thereof. But Congress may by a vote of 2/3 of each house remove such disability. 4 amendments on disabilities or for participation in the rebellion were introduced in 1866. And in a report of the Committee of 15, April 30th, 1866, there was included a 3rd section by which all persons who voluntarily adhere to the right of vote until July 4th, 1870, attempts were made to amend this in the House. When the resolution reached the Senate, there were 15 attempts to alter this section. On May 30th, Senator Howard of Michigan, in behalf of the Senate members of the Joint Committee on Reconstruction, presented a new draft in which he proposed in place of the 3rd section, the provision which now appears in the 14th Amendment. Many efforts were made to amend it. The Democratic senators seemed to prefer Howard's substitution to the House amendment. This section passed. The question of suffrage for Black people was covered in Section 2. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective members, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding indigenous, not taxed. But, I don't understand what that means, but when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors of president or vice president of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive or judicial officers of the state, or members of the legislature thereof, is denied to any of a male inhabitants of such state, being 21 years of age, a citizens of the United States, or in a way abridged, except for participation in rebellion or other crimes, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which a number of such male citizens shall bear the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. The question of black. Oh my gosh, you scared me. What?
Sorry. So what I wanted to say was, so when it means indigenous people not taxed, indigenous people, there's indigenous people that like lived in the city and stuff like that, and then there was indigenous people that lived already on reservations, and they were talking that indigenous people were not counted as members of the state because they were members of their own nation, kind of like that.
Thank you. The question of black suffrage gives rise to 5 proposed amendments just before the Civil War. All these excluded persons of black descent from the right to vote, and most of them excluded from them the right to hold office. In the opening days of the 39th Congress, there were 6 propositions to guarantee the right to vote to black people. Two proposed an educational standard in voting for federal office. Bothwell proposed an amendment making unlawful any distinctions in the elective franchise on account of race or color. Another amendment proposed to give. Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Cancel. No. What are you doing? My phone was. Oh my God. Okay, sorry. No, not that phone. My other phone. I hit my phone and it was doing an emergency call. Another amendment
Oh,
proposed to give Congress power to defend the qualification of voters and members of Congress and the presidential electors. Henderson, January 23rd, 1866, proposed an amendment denying the state the right to discriminate against voters on the account of race or color. January 22nd, 1866, a proposal on the apportionment, the apportionment of representatives and abridgment of representatives was present by the Committee of 15 to the House. It was recommitted January 29th and reported again January 30th. It passed January 30th. In the Senate, there were 5 attempts to amend this resolution. Sumner presented a resolution making discrimination against people of color impossible in the courtroom or ballot box. This was rejected 39-8. Howard proposed to omit to the franchise black people in the Army and Navy, or those able to read and write, or those who had property to the value of $250. This was not acted on. Sumner again attempted to amend the resolution by making illegal discrimination of Illinois was rejected. 3 other propositions to amendment of the Constitution relative to the suffrage were introduced before the close of this Congress. One was a proposition by Stewart of Nevada on March 16th. This foreshadowed the subsequent grandfather clause. It admitted that Southern states, on several conditions, one which was, here it is, the extension of the elective franchise to all persons upon the same term and conditions, make no discrimination on the account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude, provided that those who were qualified to vote in the year 1960 by the laws of their respective states shall not be disenfranchised by reasons of any new tests or conditions which have been or may be prescribed since that year, when the aforementioned conditions shall have been complied with and ratified by the majority of the present voting population, a general amnesty shall be proclaimed, that all the loyal states be respectfully requested to incorporate in their constitution an amendment corresponding to the one above described, that is not intended to insert a coercive power on the part of Congress in regard to the regulations of the suffrage in the different states, but only to make an appeal to their own good sense and love of country with a view to prevention, and serious evils not threatened. Seward said in 1870, when the Reconstruction question arose about the 14th Amendment, I proposed that all persons born in the United States shall, after the date of Mr. Lincoln's proclamation, abolished slavery, should be entitled to vote on arriving at the age of 21 years, and this should enter into Reconstruction. The resolution of the new 14th Amendment passed the Senate June 8th, 1866, by the vote of 33 to 11. 5 members not voting. The amendment resolution was brought before the House and was called up June 13th. After a limited debate, the amendments made by the Senate were concurred in by a vote of 120 to 32 not voting. Thus, the 14th Amendment was sent to the states for approval. After the president vetoed of the Freedmen's Bureau bill, many members wanted the question immediately reconsidered. And the day after the president's speech of February 22nd, Senator Wilson introduced a bill which was not reported. The legislators of several states approved of the bill by petition, which urged maintaining the bureau. The president tried to counteract this by sending 2 agents, General Stedman and Fullerton to investigate the Bureau. They were both in sympathy with his policies and made a tour of 4 months. They commended Howard and believed that the Bureau had done much to preserve order and organize free labor, but that it had sometimes been dishonestly and judicially administered,
Yes.
and that it was time for it to come to an end. This report was widely calculated and discussed. The charges were investigated, and public confidence in the Bureau was shaken. Nevertheless, May 22nd, a bill to continue the Bureau was introduced. It differed from the bill in February 9th in limiting the Bureau to 2 years. Land held under Sherman's order was to be restored to former owners and other land furnished and dispossessed freemen. Army officers were retained in the service of the Bureau, and commissioners were authorized to cooperate with the agents of benevolent associations. Property was to be appropriated for the education of the freemen, the military protection of their civil rights guaranteed. After discussion, the bill passed the House May 29th by the vote of 96 to 32. In the Senate, the bill was amended and a conference was held. The conference agreed that the question arising out of Sherman's order should be left entirely with the president for settlement. On June 16th, the president vetoed the bill and called the Freedmen's Bureau a proposition to transfer 4 million slaves from their original owners to a new set of taskmasters. By a severe exercise, the party discipline, according to Blaine, the necessary 2/3 vote was procured in each house, and the bill passed over the president's veto on the same day that it was received. This government guardianship of free men was given a temporary extension under a girding and partly inimical administration. In the disposition of Congress to yield in the part to the president was manifest. On June 6, the Committee of 15 was reappointed. Subcommittees had been taken testimony all over the South. The final report of the Committee of 15 was made June 18th. It made an 800-page book, and 100,000 copies were distributed. Its majority and minority sections summed up the strongest arguments available for and against the proposed methods of Reconstruction. The part of the majority report that touched black people said slavery had been abolished by the constitutional amendments. The large proportion of the population had become instead a mere chattel, freemen and citizens. Through all the past struggles, these had remained true and loyal, and had a large number fought on the side of the Union. It was impossible to abandon them without securing them their rights as free men and citizens. The whole civilized world would have cried out against such base ingratitude and the bare ideas of offensive to all right-thinking men. Hence, it became important to inquire that could be done to secure their rights, civil and political. It was evident to our committee that adequate security could only be found in appropriate constitutional provisions. The increase of representation necessarily resulted from the abolition of slavery was considered the most important element in the question arise out of the changed conditions of affairs. The necessity for some fundamental action in this regard seemed imperative. It appeared to our committee that the rights of these persons, by whom the basis of representation had been thus increased, should be recognized by the general government, while slaves they were not considered as having any rights, civil or political. It did not seem just or proper that all the political advantages derived from their becoming free should be confined to their own former masters, who had fought against the Union and withheld from themselves, who had always been loyal. Doubts were entertained whether Congress had power, even under the amended Constitution, to prescribe the qualification of voters in a state, or could act directly on the subject. It was doubtful, in the opinion of our committee, whether the states would consist to surrender a power that they had always exercised, and to which they were attacked, as the best, if not the only method of surmounting the difficulties, and as eminently just a proper in itself. Our committee came to the conclusion that political power should be possessed in all states exactly in proportion as the right of suffrage should be granted without distinction of race or color. It appears quite clear that the anti-slavery amendments, both to the state and federal constitution, were adopted in the South with reluctancy by the bodies which did adopt them, while in some states they have been either passed by in silence or rejected. The language of all the provisions and ordinances of these states on the subject amounts to nothing more than an unwilling admission of an unwelcome truth. Looking still further at the evidence taken by our committee, it is found to be clearly shown by the witnesses of the highest character and having the best means of observation that the Freedmen's Bureau, instituted for the relief and protection of freemen and refugees, it is also universally opposed by the mass of the population and exists in the efficient conditions only under military protection, while the Union men of the South were earnest in its defense, declared with one voice that without its protection, people of color would not be permitted to labor at fair prices and could hardly live in safety. They also testify that without the protection of United States troops, Union men, rather of Northern or Southern origins, would be obliged to abandon their homes. The feeling in many portions of the country towards the emancipated slaves, especially among the uneducated and ignorant, is one of vindictive and malicious hatred. Its deep-seated prejudice against people of color is assiduously cultivated by the public journals and leads to acts of cruelty, oppression, and murder, which the local authorities are at no pain to prevent or punish. There is no general disposition to place people of color, constituting at least 2/5 of the population, upon terms even the civil equalities, while many instances may be found where large planters and men of the better class accept the situation. They honestly strive to bring about a better order of things by employing freemen at fair wages and treating them kindly. The general feeling of disposition among all classes are yet totally averse to the toleration of any class of people friendly to the Union, be they white or black. And this aversion is not unfrequently manifested in an offensive manner. This part of the report was signed by 12 members of the committee. The other 3 members submitted to a minority report. It was in the main the old metaphysical argument signed by Johnson, and constitutional lawyer from Maryland, Rogers, the extreme advocate of Southern rights from New Jersey, and Grider. They are asking to disenfranchise a numerous class of their citizens, and also to agree to diminish their representation in Congress, and of course in the Electoral College, or to admit to the right of suffrage their person of color males of 21 years of age and upwards, a class now in the condition of almost utter ignorance, thus placing them on the same political footing with white citizens of that age, for reasons so obvious that the dullest may discover them. The right is not directly asserted and guaranteed in granting suffrage to black people. That would be obnoxious to most of the northern and western states. So much so that their consent was not to be anticipated, but as a plan adopted because of the limited number of black people in such states, will have no effect on their representation. It is thought it may be adopted while the southern states, it will materially lessen their numbers. These latter states will assent to the measures can hardly be expected. The effect then, if not the purpose of the measures, is forever to deny representatives of such state, or if they consent to the conditions, to weaken their representative power, and thus properly secure a countenance of such a party in power as now controls the legislation of the government. The measures in its term and its effect, whether designed or not, is to degrade the southern states, to consent to it will be to consent to their own dishonor. Just a whole bunch of people saying, yeah. Neither Sumner nor Stevens was satisfied with the 14th Amendment. On the last day of the session of July 28th, 1866, Thaddeus Stevens made his last defense of black suffrage. He was at the time worn out. His health was precarious. He was 73 years of age, and he hardly expected to return to his seat in the House. With deep solemnity, he sought to make one more, perhaps an expiring effort, to do something which shall be useful to my fellow men, something to elevate and enlighten the poor and oppressed and the arrogant of this great crisis of human affairs. The black man, he declared, must have the ballot, or would continue to be a slave. There was no alleviation to the lot of a bondman, but, quote, a freeman deprived of every human right is the most degraded of human beings. Without the protection of the ballot box, the freemen were, quote, a mere serf, and would become, quote, the victim of their former master. He declared that what he had done for humanity. Quote, I know it is easy, he said, to protect the interest of rich and powerful, but it is a great labor to guard the rights of poor and downtrodden. It is the eternal labor of Sisyphus, forever to renew. It is perhaps my final action on this great question. I can see nothing in my political course, especially in regard to human freedom, which I could wish to have expunged or change. I believe that we must all account here after our deeds done in the body that political deeds will be among those accounts. I desire to take to the bar of that final settlement the record which I shall this day make on a great question of human rights. While I am sure it will not make atonement for half my errors, I hope it will be some palliation. After there any who will venture to take this list with their negative, Are
there any?
I think I said that. Oh well. Are there any who will venture to take the list with their negative seal upon it? And who will dare to enroll it before the stern judge, who is the father of the immortal beings, whom they have been trampling underfoot, and those souls they have been crushing out. This was not the, this was, okay, hold on, see what time it is. Okay, good. This was not, in fact, his last speech, but it had the tone of a final message. Congress adjourned before the congressional plan of Reconstruction reached its final form, but its general outline was clear, and no further compromise between the congressional majority and Johnson was possible. Already, the president's attitude on the 14th Amendment and Reconstruction had led to 2 suicides, the resignation of 3 members of the cabinet, and although Stanton remained his retention caused the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, Sumner, much against his will, had remained silent when the Senate, by party caucus, had decided upon the 14th Amendment on the last day of Congress. He wrote the Duchess of Aggerly. The suffering at the South is great through the misconduct of the president. His course has kept the rebel spirit alive, the depressed the loyal white and black person. It makes me very sad to see this, considering the difficulties of their position. Black people have done wonderfully well. They should have made a Moses as a president, but they had found a Pharaoh. That's pretty good. Particularly, see what time it is, okay, real quick. Remember 3:55. It's okay. You can miss. Yeah, Johnson's a piece of shit. All right. Everybody remember 3:55. 3:55. Ooh. Looks like hold on, is that enough? Something? No. 3:55. No, doesn't look like it. Whoa, okay, hold on. 3:55. Wait. Go back up here. That's better. Let's see how far I get. 3:55. I doubt I'll be able to finish this chapter. It's almost done. So we'll see how far I get. 3:55, right? Right. Okay. Particularly had the situation in Louisiana became tense, the New Orleans riot of July 30th, 1866, confirmed the abolitionists in their opinion that the reconstructed state were in the power of the rebels, and that they were using their power to put black people back into slavery, and that no man, white or black, who was friendly to the Union. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yes. Restriction. Got it. Okay. Great. Where was I at? Reconstructed states were in the power of the rebels, and that they were using their power to put black people into slavery, and that no man, white or black, who were friendly to the Union was safe in the South. There were reported 1,000 murders in the South, with a few of the criminals brought to justice. And the country was convinced that the president had disrupted the Union Party and was conspiring with Democrats, North and South, to drive out the Republicans. In the election of 1866, there was on the side of Congress a Union Party with a center block of Republicans, the left wing of radical abolitionists, and the right wing of reactionary war Democrats. Andrew Johnson tried to unite the Western radicals and the war Democrats into a new third party, to be reinforced eventually by the return secessionists. But between extreme democracy and the reaction, there was no common ground. We only succeeded in getting the support of a few of the war Democrats and the Copperheads who were either Southerners living north or Northern men in the Southern principles. State and national conventions met. Johnson and his friends started out August 14th to form a Johnson party. The National Union Convention met in Philadelphia with states north and south represented. The special wigwam, 2 stories high, was erected in Garrett Avenue, seating 10,000 people. The interior was decorated with flags. Horace Greeley called it a bread and butter convention composed of 99% of rebels and copperheads. Thomas Nast ridiculed the convention in his cartoon with Harpy Weekly. Their declaration of principles, accepted unanimously, declared the war had maintained the Constitution and the Union unaltered, and that neither Congress nor the general government had any authority to deny the constitutional right of congressional representation to any state. They urged the election of congressmen who would admit all, quote, loyal representatives from the South. They affirmed the inability of the state either to succeed or exclude any other states from the Union, and the constitutional right of each state to decide for itself the qualification for voting within its borders. There insisted the Constitution could not be legally amended except that all the states voted in Congress and action by all the legislators. They denied any desire in the southern states to restore slavery. They proclaimed the validity of the rebel debts and inviolability of the federal debt and the right of freemen to the same protection of persons and property as afforded to whites. They urged government aid for federal soldiers and their families. Finally, they expressed wholehearted endorsement of Andrew Johnson. The weakness of this meeting was that, first, it contained few Republicans, most of the delegates being well-known Democrats who had opposed Lincoln. It was dubbed the Conference of Copperheads, quote unquote, and among the delegates were Vallandigham and Fernando Wood. Secondly, the meeting was not followed up with careful organization. No sooner had this convention adjourned than Southern Loyalists met in Philadelphia in September 3rd to confer with Northern Republicans, including Horsey Greeley, John Jacob, Anstarn, Carl Schurz, Frederick Douglass, Brownlow, Thomas E. Benton, Morton, Cameron, and Gary. This conference met in two parts, one northern and one southern. Frederick Douglass was elected delegate from Rochester to attend the convention. It was a great honor for black men in a white city. On the train, he met Southerners and Western delegates, including Governor Oliver P. Morton of Indiana. After consultation, a committee waited on him, and through the Louisiana spokesman insisted on their high respect for him, but also on their feet that it was expedient for him to attend the convention on the account of the cry of social and political equality, which would be raised against the Republican Party. Douglass replied, quote, "Gentlemen, with all respect, you might as well ask me to put a loaded pistol to my head and blow my you-know-what out as to ask me to keep out of this convention to which I have been duly elected." He pointed out that the fact of his election was widely known, and his failure to attend would be inexplicable. Later, he was warned against walking in the procession, and for a while it looked as if he would have to walk alone, while Theodore Tilton of New York offered to walk with him. In that parade, he met a daughter of his former owner. During the convention, Speed, who had just resigned from the cabinet, called the president a tyrant, and the Southern Loyalists attacked Johnson, but spit on black suffrage. A part of the convention finally adopted this declaration: the government by national and appropriated legislation enforced by national authority shall confer on every citizen in the states we represent the American birthright, the impartial suffrage, and equality before the law. This is the one only sufficient remedy. This is our great and pressing necessity. Governor Brownlow of Tennessee, in discussing black suffrage at this same convention on September 3rd, 1866, said, "Some gentlemen from a mistaken view of my character said they were afraid of black suffrage and wanted to dodge it. I have never dodged any subject, nor have I ever been found on both sides of any subject. While I am satisfied with everything done here, I would go further. I am an advocate of black suffrage and impartial suffrage. I would rather associate with loyal black people than with disloyal white men. I would rather be buried in a black graveyard than a rebel graveyard. And after death, I would sooner go to a black heaven than a white rebel hell." That's still bad. That's still racist. Jesus Christ. Jesus. That's still bad because never mind. Therefore, in September of military, wait. Let me look here. I'm going to stop here. Why not? I can always go back. But that was still horrible because like they're comparing traitors to black people still. That's still a bad comparison. That's still racist. Oh my God.
They think they're being not racist, and it's like, no, you're still being racist.
Right? Jesus Christ. All right, 357. All right. So like this whole like thing, like I don't agree with the Constitution. It's just watered down rights, and it's like it still has slavery in it, and it still has people as 3/4 of a vote. It hasn't adapted. It's just made by white racists, and like white racists still command it and still do amendments that like don't satisfy nothing but like the white what do you call it? Oh my God, status quo. That's all this is. It's just like, yeah, sure, we like black people. Black people deserve their full rights, but not that many rights. Not now. Maybe later. You know, and it's just like, oh my God. Like even that comparison to say that like I'd rather be in a rebel graveyard. No. I'd rather be buried in a black graveyard than in a that's still bad. You're still like putting them in a bad light. You're still saying that they're lower. You know, like maybe if you compared it to like white people, maybe, I don't know. It's just fucking bad comparison.
Very much so. You nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything that you want to say before I close it out?
Labity doo-dah.
Libbity doo-dah. I want to see what the next chapter is going to be. Interested in it. Let me go look. What's the next chapter going to be on? Chapter 8. Price of Disaster. And we still have what? How many more pages?
About 400.
Yeah, we're good. We're doing good.
Yep, we're coming
I don't know.
along.
I'm kind of getting like, I understand that this is important for history to understand the intricacy of how, like, after the Civil War, they did Reconstruction, and including black people was just monstrous. It was monstrous, and how they only let like few people of high quality supposedly to even engage with this. It's like, wait, why aren't you guys asking what black people want? Oh, because they're not educated. We need to bring them education. Why are they so this way? It's because you guys purposely didn't give them education for 400 years. You took them away from their education, from their people. You took them away from that. And you supplanted them there and not gave them anything besides, good luck, you better do good. And if you don't, we'll unalive you. And it's just like, bro, they're like, it feels like they're making, like, they're blaming it on black people for their conditions. It's fucking wild.
Very much so.
Fucking wild. Yeah, let's blame black people instead of the system that you operate and you uphold. Like, I don't know. Anyways. Wait, you have thoughts? What's your thoughts?
Yep, we'll wait.
I'll wait. What's your thoughts? If they're still here. They might not be here still. 51%. Ow, my knee. That was horrible. Are they still here? I think they're still here.
They're still here.
I don't know how long. Oh, there you go. On what you're just mentioning. Where would they get the leadership voice? Well, I do believe in a communist perspective that when you, I think leaders can organically arise, and those organically arise leaders can be like taught and educated, and then those guys can teach and educate the people. And in a vanguard situation, in a rising of a party situation where they can represent, I think that these people, black people, are completely capable, because they also mention how quickly they advanced from the slave position into a different position. Like they're going too fast, it seems like, and accepting things so fast. You know what I mean? So like, it's not black people. It's just not at all black people's fault for all this, because white people put them in this condition, put them in this position, and then bred them into this position here in the United States. They were bred into this situation,
Well, they didn't take it
For
out of necessarily convenience. They took it out of the fact that white people would revolt because they were so fucking racist that they were trying to keep the white people from revolting. And where would they get the leadership? Not all black people were slaves.
Yeah. Like Frederick Douglass was not a slave. Well, I don't know. I think he was a freeman.
He was
I think
a slave.
Frederick Douglass was a
He
freeman.
was free.
He was a slave, but he was a freeman. So like, there's a possibility, because like, there's also what becomes before the leaders or the teaching. You know what I mean? What comes first? And that's the problem. Like Frederick Douglass, in my opinion, could have organized and created and helped create the situation for them. You know what I mean? But like, I don't know. It's just like, we freed them. That's all we need to do. It's like, no, you created this. I don't know. Yeah. So, but anyways, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Anybody have anything to say before I close it out? A lot to reflect on. That's for sure. Let's reflect on this. Go ahead.
Zip. Quack.
All right. Well, everybody, I hope you all have a good night. Enjoy your weekend. Maybe see you around. Oh, I know under the time of Johnson was pretty racist friendly president. Yes, exactly. Johnson he's just like every other president. You could see how when they engage in this book, you can, like, when I read this book and I see certain scenarios within this book, I think of, that's happening now. They do this now. This is what they do now, because it's all rooted. That's an important part of historical materialism, is to go back and understand how things started from and developed into now, so that we can like see patterns and see the historical critical lens on historical precedents and stuff like that. Anyways, do you have time to VC? Yeah, sure. I have an hour. I'll call you. All right, everybody. I love you, Joe. Talk to you later.